Welcome to Any Movie Recap. Today I want to talk to you about one of my all-time favorite films, The Shawshank Redemption. It was released in 1994. The Shawshank Redemption is a drama film that tells the story of Andy, a young, successful banker who is sentenced to life in prison for a crime he did not commit. Without further ado, let's get into the recap. In 1947, Andy, a banker in Maine, is convicted of murdering his wife and her lover, a golf pro. Since the state of Maine has no death penalty, he is given 2 consecutive life sentences and is sent to a notoriously harsh Shawshank Prison. Meanwhile, Ellis Redding, known as Red, is being interviewed for parole after having spent 20 years at Shawshank for murder. Despite his best efforts and behavior, Red's parole is rejected. Red is then introduced as the local smuggler who can get inmates anything they want within reason. An alarm goes off alerting all prisoners of new arrivals. Red and his friends bet on whichever new fish will have a nervous breakdown during his first night in prison. Red places a huge bet on Andy. During the first night, an overweight newly arrived inmate, nicknamed Fat Ass, no offense, breaks down and cries hysterically. However, the celebration is short when the chief guard savagely beats up the fat man for not keeping quiet when he is asked to. The next morning, the inmates learn that Fat Ass died in the infirmary because the prison doctor had been out for the night. Andy inquires about the man's name only to get put down by Haywood. About a month later, Andy approaches Red, having heard of his talents for finding things. He asks Red to find him a rock hammer, an instrument he claims is necessary for his hobby of rock collecting and sculpting. Red agrees to place the order and also warns Andy about the Sisters, a group of prisoners who sexually assaults other prisoners. Red sees something in Andy and likes him from the start. Red thinks Andy intends to use a hammer to engineer an escape in the future. During the first 2 years of his incarceration, Andy spends most of his time working in the prison laundry or fighting off Boggs and the sister, though he persistently resists and fights them every time. Andy is beaten and raped on a regular basis. When a work detail is tarring the roof, Red pulls some strings to get Andy and a few of their mutual friends assigned to the job, giving everyone a break from the usual. During the job, Andy overhears Hadley complaining about having to pay taxes for an incoming inheritance. Drawing from his expertise as a banker, Andy lets Hadley know how he can shelter his money from the IRS by turning it into a one-time gift for his wife. Hadley first threatens to throw Andy off the roof, but eventually agrees to provide the working inmates with cold beers before the job is finished. Red remarks that Andy may have engineered the privilege to build favor with the prison guards, as much as with his fellow inmates, but he also thinks Andy did it simply to feel normal again. While watching a movie, Andy approaches Red with another unusual demand and asks for the actress Rita Hayworth. Red is surprised by the demand, but agrees to place the order. As he exits the theater, Andy once more encounters the Sisters. Although he is able to talk his way out of being raped, he is brutally beaten within an inch of his life, putting him in the infirmary for a month. Boggs spends a week in solitary for the beating. When he comes out, he finds Hadley and his men waiting in his cell. They beat him so badly that he's left unable to walk or eat solid food for the rest of his life, and is transferred to a prison hospital upstate. The Sisters move on and never bother Andy again. When Andy gets out of the infirmary, he finds a bunch of rocks for him to sculpt and a giant poster of Rita Hayworth in his cell, presents from Red and his friends. Warden Samuel Norton hears about how Andy helped Hadley and uses a surprise cell inspection to size Andy up. He finds Andy reading his copy of the Holy Bible, and they talk about their favorite verses while the guards are turning the cell upside down looking for illegal possessions. Satisfied with their encounter, The warden leaves and almost forgets to give Andy his Bible back. He then encourages Andy to keep reading the Bible, saying that salvation lies within. Andy is later advised that he will work in the prison library with aging inmate Brooks Hatlin. The reason for his transfer is made obvious when a prison guard shows up asking Andy for financial advice. Not long afterwards, Brooks snaps and threatens to kill Haywood in order to avoid being paroled. Andy is able to talk him down. Brooke is paroled and goes to live in a halfway house. He is also given a job at a supermarket which he hates. Finding it impossible to adjust to a life outside of the prison, he eventually commits suicide, leaving the message, "Brooks was here," carved on a wooden beam. When the donations of old books and records arrive at the warden's office, Andy finds a copy of Mozart's Marriage of Figaro among the records. He locks the guard assigned to the warden's office in the bathroom and plays the record over the prison's PA system. The entire prison is soon captivated by the music. Red remarks that the voices of these women made everyone feel free, if only for a brief moment. Outside the office, Norden appears furious at the act of defiance and orders Andy to turn off the record player. Andy responds by turning up the volume. The warden orders Hadley to break into the office, and Andy is sent immediately to solitary confinement for 2 weeks. Not long after, Red has a new parole hearing and realizes he's been in prison for 30 years now. He uses the exact same word he used 10 years earlier, only with no enthusiasm at all. His parole is rejected again. Andy gives him a harmonica to commemorate his 30 years, which Red replies by offering Andy a giant poster of Marilyn Monroe to commemorate his 10 years. In 1965, a young prisoner named Tommy comes to Shawshank to serve time for breaking and entering. Tommy is easygoing, charismatic, and popular among the other inmates, and is befriended by both Andy and Red. When Tommy explains that he's been going in and out of prison, Andy suggests that Tommy should consider another line of work besides theft, because he seems to not be good at it. The suggestion really gets to Tommy and asks Andy to help him work on earning his high school equivalency diploma. Though Tommy is a good student, he is still frustrated when he takes the exam itself, crumbling it up and tossing it in the trash. Andy retrieves it and sends it in anyways. Tommy asks Red about Andy's case, which Red explains. Upon hearing the story, Tommy is visibly upset. He then tells Andy and Red the story of a former cellmate of his from another prison who boasted about killing a man who was a pro golfer at the country club he worked at, along with his lover. With this new information, Andy, full of hope, meets the warden, expecting Norden to help him get a new trial with Tommy as a witness. The reaction from Norden is completely contrary to what Andy hoped for. The inmates discuss the sentence, mentioning it is the longest time in solitary that they've ever heard of. They also realize that Andy may truly be innocent after all, and has almost spent 20 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. When Andy finally comes out of solitary, he and Red have a conversation where Andy talks about his wife and how much he loved her, and feels responsible for her death even though he didn't pull the trigger. Meanwhile, Norden asks Andy to shine his shoes for him and puts his suit in for dry cleaning before retiring for the night. Andy returns to his cell and the guards turn the lights off for the night. Red remarks that it was the longest night of his life. The following morning, Andy has not answered the morning call and is not standing in front of his cell like every morning. The guard yells at Andy for putting him late and walks over to his cell, expecting to find a seriously sick or dead Andy. At the same time, Norden becomes alarmed when he finds Andy's shoes in his shoebox instead of his own. The alarm then goes off, announcing a missing inmate. Norden rushes to Andy's empty cell and demands an explanation. Hadley brings in Red, but Red insists he knows nothing of Andy's plan, becoming increasingly hostile and paranoid. Norden starts throwing Andy's sculpted rocks around the cell. The rock punches through and into the wall. Norden tears the poster from the wall, revealing a tunnel just wide enough for a man to crawl into. It is revealed in a series of flashback sequences narrated by Red that many years ago, not long after receiving his rock hammer, Andy innocently tried to carve his name on his cell wall when a chunk of it came off. Andy, being a fan of geology, realized that the material the wall was made of could make it possible for him to dig a hole in case he ever needed to escape. Andy first ordered the giant poster of Rita Hayworth to hide the hole, hiding the dirt from his job into his pockets, which he would then empty in the courtyard during his morning walks. When Tommy was killed, Andy decided it was time to go. During the previous night's thunderstorm, Andy wore Norton's clothes underneath his own to his cell, catching a lucky break when no one notices. He packed many of his belongings, some papers, and Norton's clothes into a plastic bag, which he tied to himself with the rope he had asked for, and escaped through his hole. The tunnel he'd excavated led him to a space between two walls of the prison where he found a sewer main line. Using a rock, he hit the sewer line several times with the lightning strikes and eventually broke it open. After crawling through 500 yards of the raw sewage, Andy emerged in a brook. A search team later found his prison clothes, a bar of soap, and a very worn-out rock hammer. While the warden and Red are discovering Andy's genius escape, Andy walks into the Maine National Bank in Portland, where he puts Norton's money. Using his assumed identity as Randall Stevens, and with all the necessary documents, he closes the account and walks out with the cashier's check. Before he leaves, he asks them to drop a package in the mail. The package contains Warden Norton's accounting book, which are delivered straight to the Portland Daily Bugle newspaper, along with Andy's written confession and testimony. Not long after, Warden Norton finally opens his safe in his office, and instead of his books, he finds the Bible. Norton then opens it to the book of Exodus and finds that the pages had all been cut out. Norton walks back to his desk as the police pound on his door, takes out a small revolver, and commits suicide by shooting himself in the head. Shortly after, Red receives a postcard from Fort Hancock, Texas, with nothing written on it. Red takes it as a sign that Andy made it into Mexico to freedom. At Red's next parole hearing in 1967, he talks to the parole board. He then explains how much regrets his actions of the past, not because he's in jail, but because he knows how wrong it was. His parole is finally granted. He goes to live and work at the same place Brock did, even seeing Brock's message carved into the wooden beam. He remembers the promise he made to Andy. He then reveals that he was not looking at the guns, but at the compass behind the guns, and he bought one. Red follows Andy's instructions, hitchhiking to Buxton and finding the stone wall Andy described. Just as Andy said, there is a large black stone. Underneath is a small box containing a large sum of cash and instructions to come and find him in Zihuatanejo. Although I might have butchered that, but I'm sorry. He doesn't name the city just in case. After carving a new message in the wooden beam which reads, "Brooke was here, so was Red," Red violates parole and leaves the halfway house. Red takes a bus to Fort Hancock, where he crosses into Mexico. The two friends are finally reunited on a beach of the Pacific coast, just like Andy had been hoping for. If you haven't seen The Shawshank Redemption yet, I highly recommend you check it out. It's a powerful and emotional film that will stay with you long after the credits roll. And if you have seen it, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, guys, and please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.